I called my parents up and I said, hey, I don't want to be a photographer. I want to be this packaging thing. And so I took this who's who in packaging and I started cold calling and sending letters. While I was at one company for 28 years, it wasn't because I was sitting on my hands waiting for things to happen. I learned how to take lumps because you are always wrong.
Sounds like parenting teenagers.
Because you're in these critical roles, you're in these critical meetings, and you're sitting at the table, even though it might be a relatively small table, but your voice matters. Your career projection isn't always about the next rung on the ladder. Sometimes it's about those lateral roles.
Yes.
Because that broadens your experience. Not only challenge you professionally, they challenge your personal kind of fortitude. And I had to stand back and say, am I this much of a glutton for punishment? Do I need to feel the pain as acutely as I have been? When you feel burnt out, go help somebody solve a problem.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Packaging Speaks. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by Liz Mellone, a packaging executive with more than 30 years in the industry, most of which come from Colgate Palmolive. Very excited to be hearing about her journey through Colgate and how she ended up at the VP level. Liz, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Christian, for having me.
Yeah, I'm really, I think, we've talked a little bit on the phone several times. I think that this format will really should be good to share a very interesting story with the crowd. So
Great.
Thanks for coming. I think, we'll just jump right into it. You're one of the things that tips me off right away that this could be a unique conversation is that you're coming from Indiana State. And with 3 or 4 other education accomplishments in your background, but can you talk to me a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with actually taking a step a little bit backwards. My first year of university was at RIT.
Okay.
And I went to RIT with the plan to become a photographer. I had dabbled around with photography when I was in high school. I took a night class at one of the, continuing education things, and I thought that sounds like a great way to be a professional, take photographs. So I went to a renowned university, RIT, for photography. They had a great program. And actually, my grandmother was a graduate of RIT, which was kind of an interesting connection there. But anyway, so I went out to RIT to become a photographer, and I learned early on that I did not like it. I was not good at it. It was very hard. It was surprisingly technical because back in those days there was no autofocus. It was all manual focus and figuring out f-stops. And I was in the dark
heavy
lab.
Equipment and
Yeah, and I was in the dark room, with the chemicals, doing the whole thing, taking a shot of the negative onto the paper and then developing it. Well, I can't even remember anymore. Anyway, so I didn't like it. And as anybody can probably recall from their own university experience, your first year is extremely difficult, right? You're getting used to being on your own for the first time. You're in the kind of the challenges of a schedule, trying to figure out classes and blah, blah. So after realizing that I was like in trouble because photography wasn't going to do it for me, I took a packaging 101 class there because that was something that was interesting. I had met some other kids on campus that were in this program called packaging technology or packaging science. I was like, what's that? And I really liked it. It was great. And I called my parents up and I said, hey, I don't want to be a photographer. I want to be this packaging thing. And they're like, okay, but we were only going to send you to photography school for 2 years because we're from Indiana and that was RIT and it's a private university and it's pretty expensive, right? Kind of a reality.
I've got my oldest son is a senior in high school. I'm getting dangerously close to that reality myself. So it's very much on my radar.
Yeah. So I said, okay, gosh, that's not what I wanted to hear, of course. So I did a little research, and lo and behold, Indiana State had a packaging program. And I think I got into this because I became aware of IOPP when I was at RIT, the Institute of Packaging Professionals, and that's how I found Indiana State. And so I called my parents back and I said, okay, so I guess I'll leave RIT, but I'm going to go to Indiana State and pursue this packaging thing. And that's what I did.
Right.
And that's
And were you
how, like,
able to get your parents to do 4 years because you were going to a state school?
yeah,
There you go.
exactly. Yeah, it
Nice.
worked out. Yeah, it worked out really great. And that's why I'm one of, like, I don't know, very few packaging professionals from Indiana State.
Well, I think that number's
Um,
going up. They've been a pretty
I hope
robust
so.
presence recently at the Pack Expo and such. In Education Row, I think they're trying to grow that program. I
I hope
forget the
so.
guy's name.
Yeah.
I've got his business card in my drawer though behind me. And maybe I should get out there for a visit. Do you remember about how many people were in the program back then?
It was pretty small, probably a hundred, or maybe it was pretty small at the time. The guy who led the program was Dr. Cooksey. I don't even remember his first name actually. He structured the whole program. It was kind of industrial focused. I took a
Mm-hmm.
lot of interesting classes. We had a sample table in the lab. I worked in the packaging lab, and we did a lot of packaging testing for local businesses. I became involved in their chapter of IOPP. We started their chapter up, and it was great, and I really enjoyed it. And I took all kinds of, I took all the science classes, and then there were all these weird electives. Like I took a welding class. I remember that, and I'm like, that's pretty strange. And I had, like, the helmet that came
Do you
down
still
and
have? Do you have any art that you made in class or anything like that
no,
in your house?
I don't think so. No. Anyway, so and then I did an internship there. Yeah, like it was a regular program, right? And I had an
Yeah.
internship. I worked at Bristol Myers Squibb one summer as a packaging engineer early on, and that was wide, eye opening. Opens
Uh
your
huh.
whole world up to the industry, the professional career. And I just kept going. I never felt any like doubts at all.
Great. Um, your first job was that at Reckitt?
Yeah, so I left when I graduated Indiana State. I happened to bring with me one of those books that the IOPP happened to publish called "Who's Who in Packaging."
Okay.
And when I got home that summer, my parents were told me, like, you got to get a job. So your goal is to send out resumes. And so I took this "Who's Who in Packaging" and I started cold calling and sending letters. And I met somebody like you who was a recruiter, and that's
Yep.
how I got my first job. He connected me with this small company out of New Jersey. They were called Lennon Fink, or LNF at the time. They made Lysol, Resolve, and a whole bunch of other kind of cleaning products. They had a lot of brands, and they flew me out there to interview. Um, and it was wild. I flew out for the day from Indiana to New Jersey,
Hmm.
interviewed, talked with a bunch of different people, and flew home that night.
They
And
didn't
I
have
was
you
like,
stay and explore the area or anything?
I know, no,
Oh,
not back then. And I
okay.
wish I had. That was a wild experience. And they offered me the job, and I said, yeah. I happened to have some family that lived in Jersey, so it was a little bit of a, it was a little bit of a kind of a leap, I would say. But I felt, and my parents felt comfortable at the time, 22 years old and moving halfway
Hmm.
across the country. But
Yeah, a
that was it.
little bit of a pace of life, cultural leap, maybe going from Indiana to New Jersey for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and that was your first role was packaging R&D, right?
Yeah, I was packing. Yes, I worked in their packaging lab, actually.
Okay.
And I did a lot of testing, and it was fun. I loved it. I had a great little community of folks that I got to know in the lab, and some the engineers, and a couple of them took me under their wing, and got to work on some projects, and I really liked it.
Why do you remember why the move to Colgate? How that went down?
Yes. So there was a merger, as happens to be in the business space, in consumer goods, and L&F was bought by Reckitt, as you
Right.
mentioned earlier. And it was very kind of like nobody really knew it was going to happen. And, I was starting to grow in my professionalism. I had been there a couple of years, worked on a lot of projects, and then they merged us with Reckitt, and we're getting to know those people. And I just happened to answer, again, a recruiter reached out and said, hey, there's this role out at Colgate. Maybe you're interested. And I was like, okay. So I got myself in the city. I bought a suit, put myself in the city, interviewed there. I think I had a couple of rounds of interviews. They offered me the job, and I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it.
Okay. And then so you went from But that was the packaging R&D role again, right? Was
That
it a title
time,
bump or anything, or
yeah.
okay,
I got a bump
senior
in
engineer and more
title, bump
money?
in
Yeah,
pay, of course. When you work in New York, you tend to get a little bit of a premium, anyways. I had decided to commute at that time. Um, this packaging organization at Colgate at that time and up until like 2018 or so was a supply chain function.
okay,
Yeah. And so I worked there as a packaging engineer on Palmolive dish liquid and Murphy's oil soap. So still in that the household
right,
products, which was the good fit for me coming from Reckitt.
for sure. Okay. The products you mentioned to me, I mostly think of bottles, caps, closures,
Yep,
sprayers, that type of stuff, right?
that's right. Yep.
And is that pretty representative of your experience up to that point? Not a lot of flexibles or anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think flexibles were very limited in terms of like wraps, but
Sure.
specialty pack wraps and multi packs and things like
Okay.
that. But generally, it was rigid packaging.
It was about maybe 8 to 10 years in package development before you started moving cross functionally within Colgate. It was maybe 5 or so years into your time at Colgate where you started moving around. Is that right?
Yeah, when I got to Colgate, and again, it was a supply chain role. I reported to the North America. I don't know what his title was at the time, but North America director or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
for the home care category. And we had a supply chain leader above the packaging team, and I really enjoyed working for him. He was very very experienced and very direct in personality and kind of a little bit rough around the edges. But he became really kind of a mentor for me and kind of was very straight about how the organization worked,
Yeah.
right? How things got done.
I'll take rough around the edges as long as you're somebody who's straight with me and not wasting my time. Right?
100%. And that's
Yeah.
exactly right. And so he was really instrumental in helping me really see how to manage the organization, even at an early in career position. And as we would sit down occasionally, because he wasn't my boss, he was my boss's boss. So the few times I got to sit down with him, he would ask those questions. So what do you want to do, Liz? What's interesting to you?
Great.
And I would say, I really like this role. At the time, it was called technical manager, and it was a role that was very similar to something I had experienced or worked with when I was at Reckitt or LNF at the time. And it was kind of this project management role that kind of became the hub of the wheel in a multifunctional supply chain organization, and
Sure.
they helped progress projects. So I told that guy, Dennis Calabro, I said, hey, listen, I'm really interested in this tech manager role. I would love to be able to give it a try. And lo and behold, the opportunity came, and he said, we'd like to have you do this job. And I talked to our boss, who's now my boss's boss's boss, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they're open to giving you a try in this role. And I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
um, and I love that. It was a tech manager role. It's very much kind of project management, capital management, supply chain management. Like I said, it was kind of like the spoke of the wheel.
And from Colgate's perspective, whether or not they knew it, it was the very first step probably that they really took in solidifying a 30-year career there.
Yeah, I
I
have to
mean,
say,
by
like,
saying, yes, we're willing to take that risk. Yes, we want to develop you. We're happy to have you move around the company. I mean, people don't show that kind of commitment anymore. One or two maybe do, but for the most part, I mean, was it 29 and a half years you were at Colgate?
28. Yeah,
28.
yeah. And it was, yeah, and exactly right. I mean, I have to say that one of the things that keeps you engaged in an organization is the experience.
Yeah.
And they were a great organization to really give people, uh, again, it was a performance, played it, you performed in order to play, right? So
Yeah.
if you had the performance and you were open, um, and you were building that network of people that you work with, and people were willing to take a risk on you, they moved their people around. And I was one of, several that had the opportunity to do different things.
Great. So, technical manager.
Yeah.
and they gave you the chance, and you loved it as much as you thought you would.
Yeah. Yeah. It was intense. It was a lot. You're managing a lot of projects. But you were right in the thick of it. I think I misspoke, or it wasn't the spoke, it was the hub of the wheel. And so
Yep.
you were right in, it was really around new product development, right? And so, when you're in a packaging role, packaging is really the sweet spot role for anyone who's interested in like new product development, kind of introducing and like helping companies expand, businesses expand, because you're part of the whole product cycle,
Hmm.
right? You're part of the initial concept development. They need a package to present to the, especially this is from my perspective, consumer goods, right? You're presenting concepts to the consumer. They're presenting it in a package that happens to indicate how it's used. And so you have all that early initial concept marketing experience or partnership there. And then through product development, where they're trying out new products, formulas that go in the package, how you dispense them, how they get presented to the consumer, how they get, delivered through the supply chain. Of course, then you have all the supply chain requirements, right? Can you produce it? Can you run it on the line? Can you do it consistently and efficiently? And then there's the distribution end, like how are you getting it through the distribution centers, through to your customers? How is
Right.
it getting on shelf? How's the consumer using it? And now with circularity, how are you building a second life with that packaging system, right? So packaging roles tend to be those very um, unique end-to-end experiences, right? And so, with the packaging person moving from the function of packaging into more of a supply chain project manager role, it was a very seamless transition for me because I had been working with that group for many years, right? And at Colgate, one of the things that made this, again, consumer goods is such an interesting place to be for packaging engineers because you generally get to see the outcome of your work in market,
Yeah.
right? You see it on shelf, you see it online, you buy it yourself, you use it, your friends and family use it. It's a very
Hmm.
tangible and rewarding kind of result of the work that you do. And so when you're in this role, I mean, supply chain is a natural fit, right? Because so much of what happens in a supply chain environment is based on the ability of the packaging to be made correctly, delivered on time, get through the line correctly. Um, and you're a very key part of that supply chain network in order to get products out the door. So it's a very seamless fit for me.
Yeah. And I mean, that kept you growing. You got a
Yeah.
lot of good experience there, and it helped you see things from a different perspective. And then was it your idea, or was it Colgate's idea to bring you back to the packaging R&D, to lead a team there?
A little bit both, right? Because again, your career is only good as you manage it. You can't,
Absolutely.
while I was at one company for 28 years, it wasn't because I was sitting on my hands waiting for things to happen, right?
Right.
And you have to be honest with the people who are in the leadership and decision making positions, right? You have to be able to tell them what it is that you want to do. So when you sit down with someone and say, "Hey, where do you see yourself in 5 or 6 years?" You don't want to go, "Gee, I don't know." I mean, that's wasting their time, right? So you want to
Yes.
say, you want to have an idea. I really like this role. I really like that. I want to have this kind of experience. Um, and that helps kind of build that momentum and get that ball rolling.
Hmm.
Yeah, so Colgate, I was in the supply chain tech manager role, and I did it for 5 or more years, and it was intense. It was a lot, and then I moved into another role, which was a complete stretch, and that was hard. And when you get stretched, I mean, they're hard transitions, right? You got to really kind of dig
Yeah.
deep personally to know that you can do it. And after some years, I said, I'm ready to come back to packaging. So
I mean, I think, in fact, I've got in my notes somewhere. I recall you saying that it wasn't the tech manager job; it was right after that that was like the hardest job you had in your career. You thought, right?
yeah, yeah, I had two really tough jobs in my career. That role, which I think at the time was called materials management, I don't know. It was like I can't remember the title honestly, but it was really about making the right, it was really about supply chain management, right? From a production planning perspective.
Mm.
So my role was I worked with production planners, uh, sales forecasters that told us what products needed to be made when,
Hmm.
and then the supply chain to make sure that we had all the materials available. So it was really, again, one of these central roles.
A lot of balls in the
Um,
air.
yeah, yeah. And, every month there's a reconciliation, right? There's targets. You have
Hmm.
to make exactly what the customer wants when they want it and not too much of it because you can't have too much inventory. So it was really
Yeah.
trying, like this Venn diagram, I was really trying to be in the center all the time and all the pieces are moving at the same time. And that was hard. And you learned how to kind of take lumps because you were always wrong, right? Because the forecast was constantly changing.
Sounds like parenting
Um,
teenagers.
yeah, yeah, you're always wrong. A friend of mine would say, "This is when you want to wear a black suit because no one can see how much you sweat." So I thought that was brilliant.
So, talk to me. I guess just to keep it moving forward. Talk to me about your leadership. Your not so much the executive level leadership yet, but leading a packaging team. Five or six direct reports, packaging R&D people. What was that like at Colgate? How did that inform what came next?
Yeah. So when I was leading personal care packaging North America for Colgate Palmolive, I was at the time, and companies evolve and change constantly. So this role is not really the same role that there is today, but I was leading a team of, like you said, five or six engineers. We sat in the manufacturing site, so we sat in the plant. We were working with marketing on new products, but we were also managing the number of changes that happen. Like a packaging engineer's life is pretty administrative, right? You get in
Hmm.
the lab and do some things and test some things, but on the day to day, you're writing specifications and you're working with suppliers to figure out why they can't make something or why they have trouble holding tolerance on a dimension that's critical to your operation. Or you're working
Hmm.
on downsizing or lightweighting or label changes or what. So you're constantly, kind of adjusting the status quo, like adjusting. There's never like a package that isn't touched ever
Sure.
in your career. The whole portfolio, something's going to change constantly.
Yep.
So you're very busy doing that. And when you're in the lab, or when you're in the plant, I should say, you're also on the shop floor making sure that you're attending trials, that you're responding to issues. Something can't run, or this lot of materials bad, or whatever. So you're pretty busy. Um, and that was my first leadership experience. So on top of, and at Colgate and maybe other places, like you're not just a people manager, you're a doer and a people manager. So I have my own projects and my own responsibilities, and I'm writing my own specifications as well as leading a team doing the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so, you're pretty busy, you're pretty taxed. There's a lot of change happening all the time. And kind of like that other job, you're always getting your lumps for something that's not going right.
Sure.
So,
Okay. Um, this is the point for me where a lot of packaging careers peak. Right? You get to the point where you're a packaging manager or maybe a senior manager, you're leading teams, you're making some strategic decisions, but overall, real large scope direction of the company type stuff isn't, I would say, exceeds the standard packaging engineering career trajectory. So, what do you feel like the difference maker was in your case? Is it the desire to get to the executive level, to the VP level? Is it is some people want that and some don't? Is it ability? Was it lining up with the stars? That opportunity and ability and all this kind of lines up together? How did that happen?
yeah. So when you're in those roles, and the role that I was in is hugely vital, right? Because packaging is a critical part of a consumer goods strategy, right? It
Mm-hmm.
has to work in order to enable the products to get to the consumer. They want the toothpaste inside the tube, not the tube. So you're critical. They can't have it without the tube, right? They're not running their
Right.
hands under a spigot to get a dab of toothpaste. So anyway, so because you're in these critical roles, you're in these critical meetings, and you're sitting at the table, even though it might be a relatively small table because maybe it's just, you know, one division, one category, whatever, but your voice matters. And so I think, well, maybe I didn't sit down and say to my boss at the time that, hey, I want to be, you know, vice president of blah, blah, blah. But I said, hey, this is a situation we're facing and this is how we need to solve it. Or this is my concern and I need some help because, you know, we need a lot of people to come through and you know, tackle this problem. So your voice is super important, even at those small tables. And if you sit back and you let everybody else kind of take the lead, then
Mm-hmm.
that's it. That's where you're going to be. And if you're good with that, great. I mean, you're going to get the work because it doesn't stop.
Right.
But if you're feeling like you're going to be part of something bigger, then you need to start taking ownership of that and feeling like you have responsibility and you're going to contribute to whatever the target is, right? If it's a new product, if it's a quality problem, if it's, you know, a sales problem and they can't make enough stuff and you know, we need to make the lines run faster and the package has to be this much more on target in order to do that, right? There's all these little elements that come together that you're part of the solution and you need to be out there, you know, helping it get solved.
Yeah. Boy, that's interesting. I mean, that's the same answer you give at the beginning. How do you move from a packaging engineer to a senior engineer? You're a problem solver. You go out, you get things done, you show that you can, and your efforts are rewarded. And the world
Correct.
needs more doers. So I think that's a great piece of advice there, Liz. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's it like though? I mean, so you know now you're, you know, you've led some teams. You've really, frankly, accomplished a ton in your career. What was? Did you go through? Was it like senior manager, director, senior director, VP? Were there that many steps involved? You know, talk to me about the growth into the senior leadership.
Yeah. So there's always a lot of steps in a big company.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, the other thing I would tell, and I've told a lot of people this, that you know your career projection isn't always about the next rung on the ladder.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's about those lateral roles
Yes.
because that broadens your experience and makes you more valuable,
I mean,
you
there's no
know,
doubt in your case between the supply chain and the R&D and the project management from different angles. There's no doubt that that was a key piece in your advancement.
100%. I mean, organizations have a lot of SMEs, those subject matter experts, and you need those. But
Hmm.
you can't run an organization with only subject matter expertise because they're only going to be in their lane,
Right.
right? Eventually, you need these people to cross those lanes together and make that wonderful thing that the company's trying to do, right? So you need people that see how the whole company functions in order to pull all of those things together. So, you know, while I did advance my career pretty steadily, I took a lot of lateral roles as well. And some of those roles were with promotion, and you know, and they always, when you get moved, they always want to entice you to
They
take it,
dress it
right?
up somehow. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I did a lot of lateral roles as well, and super challenging. I have to say, like I at one point I had to stand back and say, "Am I this much of a glutton for punishment? Do I need to feel the pain as acutely as I have been?" Because when you take those lateral roles, you're naturally stepping outside your comfort zone.
Right.
And not only is it a professional challenge, as you can imagine, you're constantly learning and challenging stuff. There's also the personal thing that you bring with me, which is the self doubt, you know, the concern, the you know buyer's remorse. Why did I accept this position? It's so hard. Nobody understands me. I don't have the same experience as my team. Blah 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 blah. Right. So you can really like that per, the those lateral roles not only challenge you professionally, they challenge your personal kind of fortitude, right?
Yeah.
And that's as much as part of growth as you can get. I mean, you need to do that in order to become that leader, both from an experience point of view and also from an empathetic point of view. I think all leaders, really good leaders, carry that bit of empathy with them because they're managing humans who go through shit
Right.
every day and have to deal with it, right? So,
Empathy, man. I feel like a lot of the things I observe as struggles in society are so directly reflected in these little these little spaces of industry, of education, of that's
An experience,
empathy,
right?
being direct, telling the truth. We just get back to our core principles here, and it seems like that's the rest. It's always been the recipe for success, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I was going to say, I have to say, I'm super fortunate having worked at a multinational company that has, offices around the world. I work with people from around the world. It
Mm-hmm.
definitely makes the world a smaller place. Um, and you can kind of understand a lot of struggles that are happening, outside your four walls, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. So to look at it from where can we find value for others? Certainly, we've talked about moving around laterally and learning the company from different perspectives and not just sitting back on your laurels, but kind of taking control and looking for problems to solve. Um, are there other lessons you feel like you've learned throughout your career that maybe you could save somebody some pain by sharing with them now? Uh, what are,
Absolutely.
sorry to ask
Yeah.
such a big question.
No, no, it's important. And listen, one of the things I enjoyed most in my career was the time that I could use mentoring and coaching others. And that's probably one of the biggest benefits of being a people manager that you don't really think about when you decide to become a people manager. You maybe want the title or, the position or whatever. But, when you have the chance to kind of help others succeed, that's the reward right there.
Yes.
And one of the things I did a lot with my teams, all the people I manage, is I encourage them to ask for help because they shouldn't be sitting here in a complex project and a complex challenge, thinking they have to be the only one to come up with a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And so asking for help doesn't reflect weakness, failure, inability. It reflects awareness. It reflects mastering the problem, understanding the complexity of the situation,
Yes.
and the ability to get things done in a faster, more collaborative way. Because no company is a function of one. Not consumer goods, right? It takes everybody to come together to solve problems. And so asking for help was a big thing that I talked a lot about with my teams. And that's the one piece of advice I would give anyone at any level of their career is, sit down, reflect on the situation, really understand what the problem is, figure out what you can do to contribute to it, to help solve it. And then where the gaps are, that's where you need to go in and say, hey, I see this gap, or I'm struggling with this one area, or I think we really need this type of solution, which might be outside of your role. I need a formula solution. I need, different supplier or the supplier, whatever. I mean, but ask for help. That would be my one piece of advice.
Great. Good stuff. Um, what's next for you?
Yeah, so 28 years at one company, and I had a fantastic career. And I spent a lot of time reflecting on that over the past. Again, the reason I was at one company for 28 years is because I got to do a lot of different things,
Right.
which was fantastic. It was kind of like the game of golf. I kind of like every time I wanted to quit the game of golf, I hit it good off the tee, or I was right in the middle of the fairway, even though the next one I was in the trap or whatever. So there was always something to pull me back in. And I kind of I think of my career as kind of like a game of golf because I'm not a good golfer and I haven't golfed in a long time. But anyway, what's next for me? So I'm enjoying. I've enjoyed the time away. And kind of 28 years, you got to put that kind of into perspective in your life. And I spent a lot of time doing that. And I've done a little bit of consulting now and then over the last 6 months, and working with companies that are looking for insight into the world of packaging. And when you're in the industry and you're only talking with other packaging folks or supply chain folks in your industry, you kind of forget how unique of a function it is. Not everybody knows what you know, right? And so taking the time to sit down with organizations that don't know much about the packaging industry, don't understand the challenges around sustainability, circularity, and the impact it's had on the industry. I've been spending some time talking with folks about that, and that's really been enjoyable for me. Um, and so that's kind of what I want to do. I've played the game in the corporate world.
Hmm.
It's a great game. Ending your career at a senior level in the organization is a pretty great way to go out. And
Yeah.
I'm ready for the next generation can take the ball from there. So
Yeah. And I mean, it sounds like you're probably put yourself in a situation where you can retire if you want, you can work if you want, you can take a couple of months off and then pick up a project if you want. So good for you.
yeah,
Um, if somebody wanted to contact you to say, hey, Liz, I need help with something, what's the best way to do that? Or you know what? We don't have to do that here. We'll put it in the comments underneath if anybody wants to
yeah.
contact you.
LinkedIn is great. I've connected with a lot of people on LinkedIn, and I'm
Right.
available that way for sure.
Great. Okay. Find Liz through LinkedIn. Um, I guess for me, this has been a great conversation. I think there's been a lot of useful stuff in here. Is there anything you feel like we should have talked about? Something you really wanted to share with the industry or with former colleagues who might be watching or family who's listening to this just for fun? Is there anything you want to say to anybody while we're here?
Wow, that's a great question. Well, I mean, if you're in the industry, you know how transformative sustainability has been and the pressures around sustainability. So, and that ebbs and flows, right? I think we're kind of now maybe in the valley a little bit after climbing that
Yeah.
very challenging mountain to get to our 2025 goals. And, maybe there's going to be some changes coming forward, but ultimately continuing to develop responsible packaging that understands the user cycle and enabling things to really have that circularity, that second life is going to continue to be important and will continue to evolve. So I think all engineers need to know that's part of the job, right? That's table stakes. It's not optional anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And staying connected that way, no matter what your industry is, because there's waste in every element of product development in whatever it is, industrial or consumer good or medical or whatever. Um, and I think the other thing is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to kind of connect with people, to make make it known what you want to do. If you want to grow your career, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. But you still have to
Absolutely.
perform, right? You can't just like ignore things or not get things done. So every job is important in an organization. So you have to know what your job is and why it's important, and where those handoffs are. What's coming to you? What do you expect when things come to you? Where does when your job is done and you're transitioning it to someone else? What do they need from you? So that's how you kind of solidify that area of success, right? Um, so those would be some things that I would like to chat about with other folks. And
Great.
I've looked at things like again, kind of doing the fractional work or the consulting is very personally satisfying for me. Mentoring, again, I spent a lot of time at Colgate. I was fortunate enough to mentor folks inside and outside the organization. Getting involved in organizations is important. When you feel burnt out, go help somebody solve a problem that has nothing to do with you.
Hmm.
Get outside of your world, because that'll give you a little, breath of fresh air. It'll help
Yeah.
clear your head. Yeah, so don't get stuck, churning over your own challenges. Go help someone else with their challenges.
Great idea. And not just go, I mean, taking a walk or something like that. That's good, healthy for a 15-minute break. But going out and solving somebody else's problem will be a boost in confidence and,
100%.
get those endorphins going in a way that just going outside for a few minutes probably won't. So that's
Absolutely.
a great suggestion. Liz Mellone, everybody, thanks so much for joining me today. I feel like this has been 40 minutes extremely well spent, and I feel that our audience will feel the same way. So, thanks so much, Liz. I really appreciate it. Let's continue to keep in touch, okay?
Absolutely. We'll do that. Thank you for reaching out.
You got it. All right, take care. We'll see you next time on Packaging Speaks.